Today I'm going to talk about The Wire. Now, this video is part of what I call my television addiction series. I explained the premise behind this series a few videos back. You can see the links in the description down below if you're interested. But basically, it's me sorting through a lot of the DVDs that I binge watched back in 2011 and 2012 when I was watching way too much TV and am now trying to sort through some of the series that I binge watched during that time. For whatever that may or may not be worth. I'm a little bit nervous making this video actually for a couple of reasons. One is because I binge watched this series so many years ago. I fear I'm not going to be able to talk about it completely intelligently. I should still be able to hit on maybe a few main points, but it's not as if it's really fresh in my memory. And then the other thing I'm nervous about is that this is The Wire. You know, it's a show with a lot of obsessive fans. It's also a show that a lot of smart people smarter than me, have dissected from many different angles and pulled out a lot of symbolism and motifs and various plot threads, and it's a show that maybe rewards intelligent viewing and careful viewing. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world. Even if this was fresher in my memory, I don't think I would be able to do it really the justice it deserves. I do, however, take some comfort from the thought that very few people are going to see this video. Because, see, on this channel, the videos of mine that get a lot of views are when I review something that nobody else on YouTube has reviewed. Some obscure book or some specialized book, you know, a book on teaching English as a second language or something like that. And then when people are searching for this in YouTube, then my video will come to the top of the search because I'm the only one doing reviews of it. But whenever I review something popular, something that loads of other people already have videos on, then my video is not going to come to the top of any search that anyone is doing on YouTube. So that there will be maybe a handful of regular subscribers who will see this video, and then it's going to promptly get buried under my outgoing videos under the weekly videos I make. And nobody who is searching for The Wire is going to stumble across this video because there are going to be so many other videos that are going to come across their attention way before mine. So in that respect, maybe I shouldn't worry too much about it. But that does actually touch on another issue, which is to a certain extent, almost everything there is to say about this series has already been said. So I'm not going to try and get the last word on this, or I'm not going to try and be comprehensive. What I am going to do is maybe just talk about this series from my own perspective. You know, what it felt like to me when I was watching it. Now, The Wire has a bit of an infamous reputation. It's got a reputation as that show all your friends are bugging you to see. You have to see this show. You've got to see this show. What do you mean you haven't seen The Wire yet? You have to see this show. And I think that reputation was even more pronounced 10 years ago than it is now. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But I think 10 years ago, it was even more so that this show had the reputation of being the prestige show that all your friends were berating you for not having seen yet. And obviously the reason why it was more pronounced 10 years ago is because 10 years was right after The Wire had come out. I mean, it was on air, I believe, from 2003 to 2008 or something like that. But it didn't actually pick up steam until after it came off the air. When it was actually on the air, very few people appreciated it. Which is part of the reason that they didn't get as much funding as they would have liked for, I think, their last season. But then once it came off the air, Then people started noticing it and the prestige started growing. And I think right around 2010, 2011 was like when this show was at the peak of its prestige. Or is it still at the peak of its prestige? Are your friends still bugging you to see it? Let me know what you think. But anyways, long before I picked up these DVDs, I had heard from many different people that I should see it. Both friends in person and also, people I hadn't seen for years that I was just keeping in touch with via Facebook. A few of my Facebook friends, at least two that I can think of, made Facebook posts comparing The Wire to a novel, saying, this has got all the complexity of a novel. This is prestige TV. It will improve your brain just as much as reading a novel. And that was actually a fairly common or cliche comparison that was being made back in those days, that the Wire was equivalent to reading a novel because it was just as complex and layered as a novel is. So when I was in Cambodia and when I had access to all these DVDs, I decided to check it out, of course. Now, my initial reaction was I was a bit put off by it for a few reasons, actually. One actually was I wasn't wild about police dramas in general, or the whole kind of cops and robbers thing. I mean, they were okay, I guess, but they didn't really grab my attention. I wasn't overly interested in the police department in Baltimore. I wasn't overly interested in the war on drugs and the gangs and all that stuff. It wasn't something I was overly interested in. So there's that. I mean, I checked The Wire out anyways because so many people had been recommending it to me. But it went in slightly skeptical to it. And then at the beginning, the first few episodes seemed like it was a lot of people using very vulgar language or acting in a very vulgar way. And also, and this was true of the cops as well as the criminal side. I mean the gangsters, of course, but the cops were just, making a lot of sexual jokes that and I don't mean to be a Puritan. I don't consider myself a prude, but it just seemed like it was a bunch of people who were just being vulgar for the sake of vulgar and thought they were much funnier than they were. And everyone had kind of a swagger, like, oh, aren't I so cool type thing. That made me think that both the writers of the show were full of themselves and the actors were a bit full of themselves. And also, a show that has gotten this much praise, you come in with high expectations. You expect to be blown off your seat right from the beginning, and I wasn't. Which is not to say it was bad. I mean, the show was never not entertaining. Even from the first season, from the first few episodes, it was definitely passable enough. I could watch it, but it didn't absolutely hook me. So I had a friend, somebody I had used to work with in Cambodia who had moved to Malaysia, and I was texting him and I said, I'm watching The Wire, but I don't think it's all that great. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep up with it. We were texting back and forth about various TV shows we were watching. And he texted me back almost immediately, and he said, Joel, you are an idiot. He said, this TV show is, what did he say exactly? It's the crack cocaine of television, meaning it's just so completely addictive. He said, I've watched it all the way through in its entirety twice. He said, I thought it was just a cop show. I thought it was just a normal cop show myself when I first started watching it. And it's not. It's not at all. So I stuck with it, and I stuck through the first season, and I I didn't love the first season, and again, I'm hesitant to say that, because I know even in the first season there are all these themes and motifs being developed, and somebody who's much smarter than me is going to have a whole video essay on all the stuff that's going in the first season. The surface level stuff I of course got. The fact, that these kids in the pit are kind of trapped in this life, and the problems with the corruption and ineptitude in the police force. The very surface level stuff is very hard to miss. I'm not sure how much I picked up on the deeper stuff. But just in terms of the surface level plot of the cops versus the gangsters, it was okay. And then we get into season 2. Now, The Wire is famous for every season adding a new layer to the problem of the war on drugs. So the first season we just see the cops and the gangsters. Then the second season we see the dock workers. Now, the dock workers are connected to the war on drugs because the docks are where the drugs come in a lot of the time. And the dock workers with their corrupt unions, and they're getting their payoffs, and how they are connected to this whole thing. And it's clever insofar as it goes, but again, I have to admit to being a little bit put off by this, because all of a sudden season 2 we get all these new characters thrown in our face, and I'm like, no, I don't want the new characters. I spent all of the last season getting used to the old characters. Now I've got to learn all these new characters and learn their names and learn their relationships. Again, it put me off having to change settings like that. Although you do get into it by the end of it. The end of it meaning the end of the season. Now, again, I've been talking with some friends at work about this, and some of them said, yeah, season 2 isn't the best one. One of the big problems people have with season 2 is not so much the season itself, because I think the actors are fine and the story is fine, and that whole plot about the dock workers is perfectly fine as well as it goes, well acted and well plotted, and some clever stuff in there. But the show never comes back to it. There's some brief cameos by some of the dock workers in later seasons, but they're very brief. The Russian or Eastern European gangsters will go on to play a moderately prominent role in the other seasons, but the actual dock workers themselves, they never come back to. And so some people feel like it was a little bit of a waste to get invested with these characters and not come back to it. Something that the show does pretty well in later seasons is, instead of dropping plot threads, they just integrate more and more plot threads. But that doesn't truly start until season 3, where you get this additive approach. So they're adding more layers of complexity each time rather than shifting directions. But season 2 is a shift in directions, and then that just gets dropped at the end of season 2. Season 3 is where I got hooked. Where I'm sitting there, I'm watching this, and I think to myself, wow, this is the most intelligent TV show I've ever watched in my life. And if you make it to season 3, it's really rewarding to finally get into something where you have, through a fictional drama, a lot of issues being approached and discussed in a very intelligent way. And it's all fictionalized, but it feels like it's very realistic, and the fiction is being used as a way to explore different social problems. And of course, the example number 3 is in season 3. One of the police officers makes a decision to essentially decriminalize drugs in a certain area that he's in charge with. in charge of. So he says we're not going to actually arrest people for selling or using drugs in this area. It's consuming too many resources for the department. It's non-violent crime anyways. But the whole argument with the war on drugs, you've heard it before, that the war on drugs is creating violence, whereas if you would have just leave it alone or would legalize it, it would take the violence out of the drug trade. So this policeman on his own makes his decision to essentially legalize drugs in a certain area. And what I was really impressed with this is they followed this whole thread all throughout the season. And they followed it through every angle you could come at the problem with. So, the problem with well, not the problem so much, but the issues of criminals being connected to the drug trade, the issues of the violence decreasing once it was legalized. But then also some of the negative aspects, like the unsavory characters who were attracted, or a lot of the hygiene issues that resulted from all these druggies being congregated into one part. And the medical issues and the overdose issues, but didn't present stuff as like positives and negatives. Made it complex. So you have all these medical issues at this place where they had legalized drugs, which was both a positive and a negative. I mean, it was a negative in the fact that these people needed to be treated, but it could also be a positive because now you had all these cases here in one place, which made it easier for the healthcare workers to address it. And it just, it seemed like, and of course this was, the writers of the show, drawing on a lot of their experience from their reporting in Baltimore or their work with the police department, to try and just kind of think through every which angle this would have. And that I was very impressed by it, and I thought, by season 3, I thought, okay, this is a really intelligent show. And then I became one of those people who was berating their friends for not having seen The Wire. Because, there are still plenty of people out there. Go into work tomorrow and ask around your colleagues or ask in the staff room. Half of them have seen it, but half of them have not. At least that's my experience. There's still a lot of people out there who haven't gotten around to seeing The Wire. And I mean, in a way, it's hard to blame them because it is a show that takes 2 seasons before it fully comes into its own, in my opinion. But yeah, once it comes in on its own, then it's really there. And then season 3 also has the city level politics and the city council and the mayoral politics. So it's adding that level of complexity. And then, of course, season 3 also has the final showdown between Stringer Bell and Avon Barksdale, who up until this point had been running the criminal gang with each other, but now have very different competing visions for what they want the gang to be. And I'll come back to that maybe, because that's worth talking about in more detail. But to move on to the next season, season 4, is they add in the public schools. So now they've got a focus on what's going on in the public schools and how that's affecting the young people who are in the ghettos and also connected with the war on drugs. But they do a relatively good job of not dropping the plot lines from the previous season. Other than the dock workers. Those guys get completely dropped. But the other plot lines, they are still carrying on somewhat. They don't get as much attention as they used to. But they're still having somewhat of a focus on the fallout from the issues of season 3. And, the gang warfare from the previous 2 seasons is still continuing. And the city level politics that were introduced in season 3 are still continuing. And then season 5, they add in yet another layer of complexity, which is the media, the newsroom and what's going on there. Now let me back up. Season 3 and 4 are this show at its best. Season 4, I thought, was a very intelligent look at all the problems in the public schools. That did so in a very engaging way that approached it from several different angles, just like season 3 had done with its issue, and which also tied it into the narrative very well. Because, you know, when I'm describing it now, or when somebody describes the premise of The Wire to you, it just sounds a little bit disjointed. All these different storylines, you're like, I don't want to watch that. I want to watch something with one coherent storyline. But it is coherent. They do a good job in season 3 and 4 of adding in these extra layers without disrupting the narrative. It's very clever. Now season 4 is a very heartbreaking look at the trouble in the public schools, but it's excellent. It's excellent. Season 5 is where the show starts to falter. And apparently there are some behind-the-scenes reasons for this. The show was getting cutting funding, or you know they weren't giving enough time to work on it, or something. I forget the details exactly. At one point I read somewhere online about the troubles behind season 5. I don't remember where I read that. I was going to Wikipedia just now before filming this video, and couldn't find anything on Wikipedia about it. But there was some behind-the-scenes thing in season 5 where they either had the amount of time or their budget reduced, or one of the main writers left, or something like that. But it shows. The show is not as clever in season 5. All the other seasons up until that had a very grounded, realistic feel, where you got the sense that this was all believable. Season 5, the plot line started to feel a little bit unbelievable. Like, this is getting a little bit far-fetched. Which is not to say it's not watchable. It is completely watchable. It's completely entertaining. And by this point, you're hooked on it. But it doesn't have the same level of gravitas to it that seasons 3 and 4 did. So, yeah, that's my pitch for it. If you're one of those people out there who hasn't watched it, it's worth watching. I'm gonna come back maybe and circle around and talk about maybe a few things I breezed over in my initial overview of this show when I was talking about my own opinions, or sorry, my own viewing experience. So right from season 1, I think the main plot of the show is you've got the cops and you've got the gangsters. And the show is shown from the gangsters' point of view just as much as it is from the cops' point of view. Even though the cops are the protagonists, they're the sympathetic characters, they're the ones you're rooting for. In a lot of ways, the gangsters are the more interesting characters, or at least in certain story arcs or in certain parts. Now, there was an element of this, watching all this focus on the gangsters and the gang rivalry. So, yeah, let me come at this another way. The thing about the show like The Wire is, to a certain extent, it's aiming for two different centers at once, or two different targets. There's a very highbrow aspect of it, which is talking about all the problems that the city is having with its institutions. Its police, its unions, its city councils, its public schools, its newspapers. And then there's an element of it which is maybe targeting something a bit more lowbrow, which is the action scenes or the violent scenes, you know, the excitement you get from seeing all these gangsters involved in gun battles. And there is, throughout the whole 5 seasons, a lot of gangsters fighting in gun battles. There's also the character of Omar, who is a character who makes his living by stealing from drug dealers, and is thus a catalyst for conflict and violence in the storylines dealing with the gangster parts, especially in season 1, when there's only one gang in control, and they've got pretty much dominant control over their areas. That of course will shift over the course of the series when a new, young, up-and-coming gangster will encroach on their territories. But in season 1, they start out firmly in control, and the catalyst for conflict is Omar. Now, the scenes with all the gangsters shooting each other felt to me at times to be a little bit exploitative. Which I don't mean to say it is exploitative. I just mean to say that it felt that way, especially at the beginning when I was first getting into this show. You know, it felt like you as the viewer were supposed to be enjoying or taking some sort of vicarious pleasure or interest in all these young black people and their gangs and their shootouts with each other in much maybe the same way that gangster rap has always been very popular among 14-year-old white kids in the suburbs. You know, it has that kind of exploitative feel to it, where that violence and the way of the streets is something that you, as a viewer listening to gangster rap, or as somebody watching The Wire, are able to experience vicariously without actually leaving the comforts of the suburbs and experiencing the ghetto yourself. Now, again, I'm not accusing the show of this. I'm just saying that was one of my initial concerns coming into it. And certainly that is the violence and the gang warfare is a big major part of the show's running time throughout the course of all 5 seasons. I mean, I don't know, what is it? Half of the show is about the gang warfare or the various gang rivalries. But what is interesting about it is, well, first of all, there's some careful writing going on where every character in that gang, or in both of the gangs or all of the gangs, have names and identities, even the very minor characters. So, for example, like, you know, on Star Trek, where there are these red shirts who don't really have names or identities and exist just to get killed off. In The Wire, every character who gets shot or killed in these gunfights was a person or a character who had been identified in the series. So if you're watching this, especially if you're binge watching this, you can quite clearly see the character arcs where a character will go from just being a background character to gradually gaining in prominence as the other characters around him are getting killed off, to himself then getting killed off, and then the characters under him will come up. And you can go on, if you search this online, fans of The Wire have made wikis for the show, where you can trace, like, this character first made his appearance in this show, and then he was all in these different gang battles, and he killed these characters, and he was finally killed himself in a different season by this character. And this on these wikis, you can see these charts of elimination about who killed who all the way kind of up to the last few people standing at the end of the show. And all that is, of course, very violent, but it's it's done with care. It's done with care. They've